Now, domestically, that's a whole lot easier of a proposition than it is international. Domestically, we can download software all day to any of the states where the machine needs software installed, and that's easy. There are no duty impacts in doing that. So in essence, when you invoice the game, it doesn't matter whether or not it's on the same invoice or if it's on a separate invoice. But when you start dealing with international markets, it becomes really tricky. And the reason I say it's tricky is that oftentimes the question would come to us with regard to decoupling software to an international customer because there's a desire to reduce the dutiable base of the import into the country that it's going into. And just to give you kind of a bird's eye view, because this is a very complicated question to answer, and whoever asked the question, if you want to talk to me later, we can talk more. But essentially, it is possible to decouple software from an item that you're going to export and declare it for a lower value, for the value of the hardware only, provided that the software is readily available in that country. So like, for example, if you're buying a desktop computer, you can buy the hardware and you can export and import it for the value of the hardware, because the software, the operating system and the Windows or whatever you run on it is widely available to where you could go to the local software shop and buy it and put it onto the computer. With slot machines, that's not necessarily the case because we're the exclusive manufacturer of the software. So it's not natural for somebody to buy a slot machine and do something with it with no software. And since the software is only available from the manufacturer, in this case IGT, even if we did decouple the software from the game, the dutiable base would have to include the value of the software. So you can see where that area gets into, it gets very dicey. And actually, the text that actually goes into this thing is actually GATT 1994. I think it's like Section 8C, where it talks a lot about this kind of thing because this actually started coming around in the late 80s. And it's a very interesting area. It depends on what country you're trying to do what in, because in certain countries, like, for example, let's just pick Mexico, for example. We can ship a media of software into Mexico and declare it for the value of the media only, provided that every time we burn a copy of it, we would pay a price back to the parent company for the use of that software. And of course, all of these events are kind of complicated because just one thing in itself doesn't answer the whole question, because now you have to look at where you're adding costs to the business. So everything has to be properly accounted for in a particular way. So really nothing is free. It's just a matter of where you're going to capture those costs and where they ultimately get booked. So whoever had the question on the digital distribution, I'm not sure if I answered the question that you had in mind, but if you're interested as to how software is handled in this digital age, that's kind of like an overview of it.
Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
The issue that is raised here about labor and when you touch something is a really interesting issue. If you look at manufacturing costs in the United States today, the number one cost is transportation. Second are inventory costs, and third is labor. That has changed. That's completely different than it was when we were principally manufacturers 25 years ago. So that's a completely different situation. It changes how we are going to be manufacturers in the future. And it's kind of interesting, if the economy hadn't failed, the trend, we were beginning to see a trend in postponed manufacturing. And how many people know what postponed manufacturing are? Raise your hand out there. Not too many. Postponed manufacturing means basically that goods are produced overseas, but they're done so primarily as parts. Those parts are then kitted. They're brought into the United States as a base or into some new location as basically a unit. It is in effect some partially assembled unit, and then all finishing is done, and so you're able to customize it. The only people from China that I know of that are doing that today is Haier. I don't know how many people know Haier, but they make small air conditioners, very small air conditioners, like a one-room air conditioner. They make some refrigerators now and other appliances. And they do all that assembly in South Carolina. That stuff all comes in kitted. They get, I don't know, if you think about a refrigerator, you're shipping mostly air. And so that becomes very expensive if you think about a finished refrigerator or pretty much any type of appliance. You're mostly shipping air. Now today, with flat screen TVs, it's a little bit different because you can stack so many of them. You get that density, but you definitely cube out before you weight out when it comes to those kinds of things. So we were beginning to see, especially in North Texas and even bridging into the Southeast, more and more interest in postponed manufacturing, bringing in things kitted. Everybody here is probably familiar with Sprinter vans. I guess you probably know Sprinter vans are made by Mercedes-Benz. They're manufactured in Spain. They're actually kitted. They get about, to a 40-foot container, they get about 2.5 Sprinter vans. They come into South Carolina where they are final assembled. They come in body in white. In other words, inside those vans and those bodies, that's all stuffed full of stuff. And they get all that and they finish it. And then they can do all of the things that they need to do. When Mercedes came to the United States and wanted to build a manufacturing plant here, they were interested in that because of the huge tariff on automobiles. However, as they looked at it and they looked at the volume of it and what it was going to take to establish a manufacturing plant, they made a decision to continue to do this in body in white, or kitted, in other words. So they're continuing to do this, and they've done this now for 8 or 9 years as they penetrated the market in the United States with the Sprinter van. They may someday actually manufacture them here, but it turns out the trade-off between the tariffs and the labor cost and how to use labor most effectively, finishing labor in South Carolina made a lot more sense than manufacturing it in the United States, even with the penalty of the tariff on the vehicle. Now, vans are low volume compared to Toyota, so that's a little bit different economics. But anyway, that's some of the things that are going to affect us as we go forward.